Namaste, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It's my pleasure to welcome you all in this very exciting webinar. So last week we all celebrated this year's World Water Day. These old days are an opportunity to raise the visibility of important issues, but every day is World Water Day. Every person in the world needs water every single day. And we all know that water is life, but our freshwater resources are finite. Meanwhile, climate change uh, is being expressed through changes in water quantity and quality. Every day we hear that springs are drying up, or underground aquifers are rapidly lowering, lakes, streams, and rivers are extremely polluted, and whereas the water-induced disasters like floods and landfill are more frequent. Already 17 countries, home to one quarter of the world's population, face extremely high water stress. And one study predicts that water scarcity will continue to increase in the future, with around 52% of the world populations living in the water stress region by 2030. So water stress due to scarcity, poor quality, and inadequate sanitation negatively affects household livelihood, food security, public health, and livelihood choices, particularly for poor populations and families, as well as ecosystems and biodiversity across the world. Hence, an integrated approach is necessary to address these challenges and ensure water security for more resilient society. And addressing water security issues through improved water resources management will contribute directly or indirectly to all of the 17 global sustainable development goals. And when we talk about water, it should be acknowledged that water is also a very gendered issue. In all aspects of water, use, access, governance, and finances, women experience different from men. And women and girls have primary responsibility for the management of household water supply, sanitation, and health and hygiene. And when the water is scarce, fulfilling this role prevents women from taking advantage of other productive opportunities and contribute to the cycle of marginalization. Hence, gender-sensitive water program is very important here. And USAID believes that reliable access to safe water and sanitation saves lives, improve livelihood, and make communities more resilient. And investment in water security, sanitation, and hygiene are critical for progress in nearly all aspects of global development. The US government's Water for the All initiative envisions a water-secure world where people and nations have the water they need to healthy, prosperous, and resilient. Through its Water and Development Plan in support of the US Global Water Strategy, USAID helps partners countries plan, finance, and deliver safe water and sanitation services for the neediest while sustainably managing water resources. And under this framework, USAID is committed to building capacity in gender-sensitive water resource management. And today's webinar provides 3 examples of this. So with this note, I would like to welcome you to this all-women panels showcasing USAID water resource management in the Philippines, Indonesia, and Nepal. Thank you. So I would like to hand over to Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Pragya. Hello, everyone. I am Joan Dulce, the WASH lead for USAID Philippines, moderator for this panel discussion. I am proud to join an all-woman panel who will talk about the projects they're implementing and how these projects are addressing water sector challenges in their respective countries. The allotted time after the presentation for discussion, so I would like to invite the participants to type any of your questions into the Q&A box that was directed earlier by KD. And so to kick us off, let me introduce to you our first speaker. Our first speaker is Alifa Lestari, the former Deputy Chief of Party of the USAID Indonesia Urban Wash Plus activity, or IUWASH. IUWASH Plus worked with 35 local governments across Indonesia to strengthen water and sanitation service delivery systems and water resources to reach the poorest and most vulnerable segments of the population. Alifa has 30 years of experience in capacity building, training facilitation, and the implementation of participatory-based monitoring and evaluation techniques in Indonesia, China, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Cambodia. Under IUWASH Plus, he served as the principal liaison with the Government of Indonesia technical team, oversaw the project's approach to gender integration, and managed the project's regional field teams. With this, I am happy to hand you over to Alifa for a presentation. Over to you, Alifa.
Thank you, Joanne. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for all of you who joining this webinar. I'm Alifa Lestari, former DCOP for USAID IOWAS Plus. I like to share with all of you our experience in Indonesia on the role of water resource management in delivering sustainable water services. Next slide. Okay, next. Before I go to the IOWAS Plus intervention in the water delivery, I like to share with you the overview of the Indonesia. We have several challenges in water supply services. This is the top 4 of the challenges, which is insufficient quality and capacity of infrastructure. Performance and capacity of water utilities are not optimum yet. People's knowledge and awareness are still low, and limited government funding for water sector development. In terms of the raw water, sustainable raw water, next slides, please. In terms of raw water sustainability, the insufficient quality and capacity of infrastructure, well, this is really impacted for the climate change. For example, if there is a flood or a drought, the infrastructure is getting a problem because it destroy all the infrastructure due to the flood, for example. And then the performance and capacity of water utility still not optimum, especially on how to manage the water resources for the water utility. And at the people's community level, the knowledge and awareness, especially in conserving the raw water sources, is still limited. People usually still use water from water utility to other purpose that actually not necessary. For example, to wash their car, or just watering the flowers or the other plant in their household. And then limited government funding for water sector development. This is especially the budget allocation to assure the sustainability of raw water sources still very limited. Next slide please. The government of Indonesia already set the national target for safely managed wash services in our national midterm development plan for 2020 to 2024. We actually plan for having 100% access to basic water supply services, including 15% of access to safely managed water supply services. While in the sanitation sector, the target is 90% access to basic sanitation, including 15% access to safely managed sanitation services. And also, this is very in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG number 6, which is the target is 100 access to safely managed water and sanitation services. Next slide. Focusing to the water supply services, we actually have already have a big challenge where the raw water sources, especially in Java Island. This is if you see the map in the lower right, is actually the islands of Indonesia, and the 5 big islands, especially Java in the lower part. This is they already have a problem in critical raw water sources. while we know that Java is actually home for 65% of total population of Indonesia. So this is really a serious problem on the raw water sources. Next slide. The achievement, this is the data for the achievement, to-date achievement. The latest data is in 2020 for the basic access, safely managed access, and also access to pipe system. Actually, from year to year is actually quite improved, but the target is really quite high. For example, in the latest achievement in 2020, the pipe system is already 20%, but our target is 30%. Increasing 10% is really quite difficult for the water utilities. And if we look at this achievement comparing to the other countries in Asia, Indonesia is still very the lowest among the cities in Asia. For example, like here, we have the data. If we compare with Thailand, Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Japan, India, and China, we are actually the lowest percent of the access. Next slides, please. And with these challenges, USAID IWAS Plus intervention try to contribute to improve the condition. Next slides, please. We actually just completed our 5-year and 8 months project, which was started in June 2016 to February 2022, and our primary counterpart at the national will be was the Ministry of National Planning. We call it Bappenas, and Ministry of Public Work and Home Affairs, and also Ministry of Health. During our 5-year project, we also received support from the Swiss government under SECO, State Secretariat for Economic Affairs. And as mentioned by Joanne, that we are working in 35 cities and districts at the 8 provinces. We have 2 high-level target, which is 1.1 million people in urban areas with access to improved water service quality, which 500,000 among this population are the poorest 40% of the population, so B40. And also increase 500,000 in urban area with access to safely managed sanitation. Our first intervention for the water supply sector is to improve the performance of water utility. In this improving the performance of water utility, we have 6 aspects that we want to improve in the finance, service aspects, operation, administration, human resources, and also raw water aspect. As we know that since the climate change really gave a big impact to the water supply sector, we add this raw water conservation as part of the aspect for the monitoring of the performance of water utility. The objective of the improving this performance is to support water utilities in improving their performance, so they will be able to expand their services, especially to reach the poor. The intervention that given by the USAID IWAS Plus is different from one utility to another utility, depending on the baseline assessment, because one utility has a different problem comparing to the other utility. If we are look at in this aspects, the finance and operation has a biggest score. The reason because this is reflecting to the biggest challenge of the water utility. Usually, the biggest challenge is in the operation and the finance. In the operation, usually some issues. The main issues is on the non-revenue water and also the energy efficiencies. So in the finance sector, our intervention is focusing in the leverage alternative financing to support the expanding services. And in the operation aspect, we focus our intervention on the utility efficiency and non-revenue water for demand management. Next slide, please. And our final result on the this improve the performance of water utility. In average, there are 3.1% of reduction of non-revenue water and average 24.4% improvement of energy efficiency. This is really help the utility to improve their operation. And also from these two main activities, the water utility leverage about 5.95 million US dollar to support the energy reduction and energy efficiency improvement. This funding leverage coming from PDAM. PDAM is the water utility coming from the utility budget and also the local government budget. With the comparison, 55% come from the utility and 45% come from the local government. And also, as part of the investment, our project have to support the utility to engage the private sector and public sources of revenue to finance a citywide capital expenditure project for the new water or infrastructure. The total value of this project is about 200 million US dollar. Next slide. We also have a specific intervention on the raw water conservation. There are two activities we have in this program. First is spring vulnerability assessment and action plan. Why we choose the spring? Because the spring are most productive raw water sources for the water utility. And we also know that the springs, the spring in our assisted cities and district are become degraded because of several causes. For example, like due to the land degradation in richest area and also impact to the climate change from the flood or the drought. And the assessment and action plan help water utilities and local stakeholders analyze the vulnerability of spring due to the climate change impact for the quantity and the quality. During the 5 years of the project, we already developed 14 spring vulnerability assessment and action plan in 14 cities and districts. And then these all document formalized and signed by the mayors. The second activity is construction of infiltration pond. This is very simple construction, 2 times 2 times 2, so 8 meter cubic volume. And then in the top we have a concrete cover. So with this pond, we expect that will hold and infiltrate rainwater runoff into the subsoil, allowing it to percolate and recharge the groundwater aquifer. So this infiltration pond will help us to improve water availability during the dry season. And during the 5 year of the project, we constructed 769 infiltration ponds that financed not only by USAID IOWAS Plus. Usually our project is only give an example to the stakeholder, and the rest is actually funded by the APBD is the local government funding from the utility funding and also from the CSR from the private sector. From this construction of the infiltration pond, after we monitor together with the water utility, it really can improve the spring debit. For example, in Senjoyo Spring, this is in the Central Java, they can increase the debit from 80 liter per second in 2015. This is our baseline, and now is increased to 1,100 liter per second in 2019. And another spring in Ternate City's Akegaale Spring, it's also increased the debit from 75 liter per second in 2017 to 100 liter per second in the mid 2019. Next slide, please. In order to approach to reach the poor, as we know that especially in the urban areas, the poor usually is about 1 to 2% of the total population. Most of they live in the slum area and informal settlement, and usually they don't serve they serve water by the water utilities. Even though this is 1 or 2%, but the population is quite big in terms of the difficulties to reach them because they are living in this kind of urban settlement. So that's why they need a specific approach to reach the poor. So the USAID IWAS Plus have two strategies to determine the poor through the what we call with the targeting and tracking. We did the targeting in the very early of the project stage. We together with the stakeholder to identify the area with the high population of the poor household and also very limited number on the access of the wash, access to water supply and also access to sanitation. And then after we identify this location, we have some intervention activities to the community, and later on we do the tracking to check our beneficiaries whether they are poor or not. So we do the household survey. Next slide, please. We do the household survey to verify whether they are the poor, and we use the M-Water tools to identify and verify whether they are poor or not. Next slide, please.
Alifa, this is Joanne. May I just request you to wrap up your discussion?
Yes, one more slide.
Sure.
Next slide,
please. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the M-Water that we use, and our specific intervention to reach the poor, we implement 3 activities. First of all is community-based water supply system, which usually one water supply system and delivered through the piping in the household. So currently, our achievement is 2,251 new connection from 24 units of community-based water supply system, and the role of IWAS Plus is support the local government in capacity building of CBO, community-based organization, in operation and maintenance. And then the second approach is the master meter, is like in the picture here, where the water utility put the main meter in their legal area, and then the piping system to the informal settlement is developed by the project. So up to now, we connected 2,339 households in 4 cities, and our role is to support the community preparation, planning, design, CBO strengthening, and also capacity building for operation and maintenance. And the last activities to reach the poor is through the GOI grant program, where we support the water utility and local government to prepare readiness criteria, for example, local government equity funds, and also to help the water utility on mapping of the ideal capacity and determination of the potential beneficiaries, socialization, and also the construction. So up to now, the final result of the project is about 71,000 households connected to the GOI grant program. Thank you.
Thank
Sorry,
you, Alifa, for
too long.
No worries. Thank you very much for sharing the rich experience of IUWASH addressing the challenges of water utilities, of raw water conservation, and implementing very strategic interventions to reach the poor. So next, we turn to Nepal, and we will hear from Nilu Basniat, who is the chief of party of the USAID Karnali Water Activity. Karnali Water is using a holistic one water approach to increase access to safely managed water and sanitation services while strategically linking these services to productive water use and management and protection of raw water catchment areas. Nilu is a biological resources engineer, and she's an experienced program manager and technical specialist for governance in environmental water projects in Nepal with 24 years of experience in the development sector. And now let me turn over you now to Nilu for the Karnali water activity. Nilu?
Thank you, Joanne. So, namaste everyone. Greetings from Kathmandu, Nepal, and from the USAID Nepal Karnali Water Activity, which is a 5-year program that just started in July of 2021, and it's seeking to create healthy, resilient, and water-secure communities. So, next slide. So, why are we here? Basically, Nepal's made significant gains towards universal basic water supply and sanitation coverage. In September 2019, Nepal achieved open defecation-free status. However, these impressive gains do not tell the whole story. As you can see, water supply and sanitation coverage gains are unequally distributed across Nepali communities, especially the most vulnerable communities, still face lack of access to water and sanitation supply infrastructure and facilities. We also see that the coverage gains has been unequally distributed across geographies, ecological zone, wealth quintiles, gender and age disparities are obvious, and ethnicity and caste affiliations as well. Only 25% of these systems are fully functional. 40% require major repairs due to poor operation and financial management. And there are other factors like climate change, water resources mismanagement, land use changes such as deforestation, wetland drainage, overgrazing, haphazard infrastructure building that are threatening mountain and hill communities' spring sources in the Karnali River Basin where we are working. So water security, and by that I mean a combination of functioning, reliable, and resilient water supply and sanitation services, and the sustainable availability of high quality fresh water for equitable and inclusive domestic, economic, and environmental requirement remains unattained. Next slide. So we are in this geography, we are on the Karnali River. As you can see, it flows north to south. We are working in 4 watersheds. The watersheds are the boundaries that are blue stripes, that are in blue stripes. But we are also working in the municipalities that are within and overflowing some of these watersheds. In 29 watersheds, in 29 municipalities, the local government level, you can see the boundaries are in yellow and they're overspilling the watershed boundaries. The reason why this map is very important to understand is that overall water resources management requires work at a watershed level, meaning within hydrological boundaries, to achieve our goals and to achieve our targets. But we also understand that decentralization is occurring in Nepal with the federated country that started the transition at the end of 2015. The decentralization of services is quite important. And the water supply and sanitation schemes and interventions that we are working towards are at the municipal level. There'll be quite a big experiment on our project to see how they align and how overall water resources management is achieved, even though interventions are at the local level, at the municipal level, which means with political or administrative boundaries. The next slide. So we are here as a project, a 5-year project, 3 years, the first 3 years with 2 additional years of opportunity to continue our work to address barriers to a water secure future, yield life-sustaining gains in access to water supply and sanitation, especially for unserved and underserved households and establishments in Nepal's most water-stressed communities, and they're definitely in the Karnali River Basin. And for this, we are working towards increasing sustainable access to safe drinking water and water for productive use. We are supporting the construction and or rehabilitation of 270 water supply schemes that include drinking water supply and multiple use systems. We are also supporting the construction of 6 fecal sludge management interventions. What those interventions are will be guided by a city sanitation plan that will be developed for at least 12 to 14 of the urban municipalities of the 29. And these infrastructure that will be supported, the fecal sludge management infrastructure, will be supported with a business plan as well. Next. So for increased access to water supply and sanitation systems, we require a very strong governance environment, and that could be enabled through the creation and the development of legal instruments and tools. And we're looking at policies, acts, regulations. We're also looking at master plans at the watershed level. We are looking at integrated water resources management plan. At the municipal level, we are looking at developing and supporting and updating water use master plans. These are all integrated plans that take integrated planning into consideration. And also we'll be piloting payment for ecosystem services plan, mainly to take care of upstream and downstream connectedness between communities in the river system. The last area, but the most important one, is the watershed and biodiversity conservation objective on the project. You know, water is the finite commodity, hence without the protection and conservation measures, we would not be able to ensure sustainable sources of the water, especially the water management system we are helping construct and build. So we are trying to, as Alifa mentioned, there's a lot of work, even on this project, with spring source protection through bioengineering techniques and methods. Next slide. Yes, so how are we going to do this? We do have a one water approach that we will work on and pilot on this project. It is an integrated and inclusive water security framework. It creates an integrated vision and drives collective action in the Karnali River Basin, and it will be established and implemented at a watershed level. So about 4 one water steering committees will be formed with different actors and stakeholders in the water, sanitation, and in the conservation sectors. They will include local governments, locally elected representatives, and user groups and communities, and development practitioners who have been in the water sector for a while. And it is not just at the community level, but we take this at the municipal, watershed, provincial, and national level to achieve water sustainable goals. Next. So how do we implement a one water approach? I mean, it will definitely be through a one water steering committee that I just mentioned. We will be mapping and the constructed and ecological assets, actors, and associated conditions, risk and vulnerabilities first, which we are doing right now. In the first 8 months, we've started this work. A lot of research and assessments have been done. We are now identifying and also convening stakeholders using the data and technology to identify, discuss, and forge consensus around priority challenges and actions. That's ongoing right now. This is all occurring in the first 8 months. Then in the upcoming year, which we start in July 2022, we will assist stakeholders to design and implement the water user master plans, the integrated water master plans, which will include construction of these schemes. We will continuously monitor and evaluate our progress and make adaptations to achieve impact and sustainability. So next, we're looking at the interconnectedness between the built and natural assets, and how we're doing this is, as I mentioned, through a water use master plan, which is a planning water supply and sanitation with watershed boundaries and dynamics in mind through an integrated one water approach. This is a government-led process. We will be collaborating with local governments and local stakeholders, including water user groups and sanitation groups. We will also be preparing citywide water sanitation plans for fecal sludge management by improving the sanitation service chain from human toilet interface to disposal and finally reuse of human fecal waste. We will also be developing water resource management plans for each watershed through the One Water Steering Committee platform. Next. Climate risks and future demands have to be calculated. There is a program with one of our partners, International Water Management Institute, to exercise through using SWOT models, water availability, and the use and demand, doing a water accounting exercise. That will help us understand the watershed status. And also spring source assessment will be done on a wide scale. Every spring source in these 4 watersheds will be recorded for water quantity, quality, multiple use or single use. And this will also inform the water use master plan and the integrated master plan. All of this is integrated into the Ministry of Water Supplies national database. It's called the NWASH database. So there's sustainability of the use of the data and throughout the nation. So the next slide, how are we going to better serve the poor and vulnerable populations? We have managed to build 3 tools which we are actually using right now. One is the criteria-based ranking tool, which will be embedded in the water use master plan. High weightage is provided to help identify unserved and underserved communities very transparently. This is quite different, and this tool is specifically for the WASH sector, for the water supply schemes. Construction, identifying and constructing that, and making sure these communities, the marginalized and vulnerable communities, are not left out, but in fact given priority. We also have another tool, the Rapid Institutional Capacity Assessment tool, to identify gaps and devise roadmaps for enhancing capacities of local governments to mainstream gender equality and social inclusion in the WASH plans. This tool will also be used for not just for service providers, who are local government officials, but also for ones who will be operating and maintaining such systems, which are community level groups, user groups. We also have, we'll be working with local communities and local governments to enable provisions to support equal and equitable access through drinking water and sanitation bills, regulations, and directives. Thank you. We can move to the next slide, which is the last slide. And there's a quotation from this lovely lady that we just visited last week, talks about the quality of the water for cooking. And that's it. Thank you so much. Joanne, over to you.
Thank you, Nilu. I'm smiling because your presentation, one of the striking elements is the inclusive integrated water security framework. It strikes some resemblance to what is being initiated here in the Philippines. And so I would like to introduce our final speaker, who is Alma Porciuncola, the Chief of Party of USAID Philippines Safe Water Activity. Safe Water is USAID Philippines' flagship activity that works to improve water security for the most vulnerable and underserved areas of the Philippines by increasing access to resilient WASH services, improving the sustainable management of water resources, and strengthening water sector governance. Alma carries with her over 30 years of experience managing water supply and sanitation programs and public-private partnership programs involving urban infrastructure, including managing the USAID Philippine Water Revolving Fund. Under Safe Water, she leads a number of pioneering initiatives, including an integrated water security planning process, innovative financing schemes at the national and local levels, and utility governance reforms that will advance and professionalize the way local government-run water systems are managed. With that, I'm happy to turn you over to Alma. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Magandang gabi or good evening, as we say here in the Philippines. My pleasure to be with you all tonight. Next slide, please. Let me briefly give you the background about the Safe Water Project. So, Safe Water Project is the flagship project of the USAID in the Philippines. which will run for a period of 5 years. We are now on our third year. It covers water supply and sanitation services, expansion and improvement, sustainable water resource management, and strengthening of governance of the water sector. The project is operating in 3 provinces, namely Palawan, Negros Occidental, and Sarangani, which have a total of more than 50 municipalities within these provinces. We also provide national level assistance to primarily the National Economic and Development Authority on policies and essentially the enabling environment. Safe Water is a technical assistance program, and the interventions revolve around project development, capacity building, policy, and utility reform. As Joan noted, our framework hews very closely to Carnali's framework. So we have this integrated and inclusive framework, which has 3 pillars. One pillar is on the service provision, but with an eye to looking at the sustainability of the water sources. The second is on improved water resource management to protect quantity and quality of water resources, and relatedly strengthen institutions and coordinating mechanisms for watershed management. The third component is on the enabling environment, and this is where we help the Philippine government implement the Philippine Water Supply and Sanitation Master Plan and the newly approved financing policy dubbed as the Unified Resource Allocation Framework. So next slide, please. So this slide shows you the challenges that we face in water resource management. By the way, I will be focusing on our interventions related to water resource management. So the first one that you'll see is a declining forest cover. In the provinces where we work, the remaining forest cover on the average is 24%. In some areas, it is as low as 12%. We contend with competing land use and water uses made difficult by high rate of urbanization and resource use pricing that does not encourage demand management. For example, irrigation is free for farms of a certain size. Investments for water resource management is extremely low. On the average, only 1% of the local government's budget is actually allocated for water resource management. Many of our water resource management institutions are non-functional or weak. The interagency nature of the watershed management councils in particular, and the lack of or an no earmark budget, make it difficult to sustain their development efforts. Our stakeholders also have very low awareness, and all of these contribute to declining water resources. It's even made more compelling because of the climate change impact and our water supplies over dependence on groundwater sources, which are about 10% only of the total available water resources. Slide, please. This shows you the 5 strategies that the project has adopted to address the challenges that I just mentioned. I will discuss each in turn. The first one is on harnessing hydrologic analysis and data. We initially did hydro analysis for major watersheds in the 3 provinces. We've targeted watersheds that serve the highly urbanized cities in these provinces, which are also the social and economic hubs. We are, however, currently completing 60 more studies to cover all watersheds in the provinces. The hydro studies provided information on water availability and high recharge areas for groundwater. We use this information in many ways. We use it in our call for action. The information that we provided made stakeholders realize how dire and urgent their situation is, which motivated them to somehow participate in the development efforts for water resource management. We use it to ground our recommendations in the preparation of integrated watershed management plans. For example, now we know that reforestation efforts are not equal. We get a bigger bang for the buck if we focus reforestation on high recharge areas. We also used it to encourage provincial governments to lead surface bulk water supply development. That will serve several water service providers. Water service providers in the Philippines are very disaggregated, very small, with disparate governance structure, and few have economies of scale to actually develop surface bulk water supply sources. So it is much more efficient if the provincial government would develop one and make it available to several water service providers. Also realizing how important hydro studies are, we conducted training of trainers among key agencies to enable them to replicate the studies in other watersheds across the country. I failed to mention earlier that although we are working in 3 provinces, we are going to look for solutions that can be replicated in other parts of the country. Our second strategy, next please, is on the development of the integrated plans on water security. Very much the one water approach that Karnali is doing. So the water security plans is pioneering in the sense that the Philippines has not developed heretofore integrated plans that look at the service provision and the water resource management. So we're helping provincial governments prepare these water security plans, and we're also using them as our opportunity to cascade the Philippine water supply and sanitation master plan at the local level. For example, we broke down the province's contribution to the SDG target of universal coverage by 2030 and the investment requirements to achieve this target, and align the reform agenda of the 8 key reform areas of the National Master Plan to ensure coherence of national and local priority measures. The third strategy is the development of integrated watershed management plans and translating this into municipal watershed conservation plans and investment programs. The integrated watershed management plans will cut across political boundaries. However, the duty bearers for conservation and investment allocation rest with municipal governments. So it's important as well to help the municipal governments craft their local conservation and restoration plans and to allocate adequate resources. Related to the third strategy is the strengthening of watershed management councils. The Philippines has no apex body responsible for the water sector planning and policy formulation. We have several institutions that are involved, 30 or so from the count that we've done. At the watershed level, councils are composed of representatives from different national and local agencies and stakeholders, some led by provincial governments, where watersheds are confined in one provincial government, or regional directors of our Department of Environment and Natural. Elected officials have a 3-year term. The councils also do not get budget earmarks and depend on contributions for the operations and technical secretariat support. The frequent turnovers and the unstable budget affects the follow-through of the plan implementation and its periodic updates. Councils are brittle institutions, and hence safe water is helping rationalize composition, organizational structure, and frameworks and processes for planning and monitoring. We also provide capacity building for members and their technical sector. Please. The fourth strategy is on strategic use of partnerships with government agencies, private sector, civil society, or people's organizations. Safe Water leverages its technical assistance with funding or other resource contribution from partners on particularly sustainable livelihood development, conservation, and reforestation activities. We have partnerships with the likes of Coca-Cola Foundation and other big companies in the country that have sustainability commitments or advocacy for environment protection. We partner with communities as well to promote sustainable livelihood activities and link them to markets for their produce. By ensuring stable source of income, they are discouraged from quick returns, but harmful practices such as charcoal making. Next, please. The fifth strategy is to increase access to watershed management financing and to mobilize innovative sources that can augment public funding. So similar to Karnali, we are scaling and improving the payment for ecosystem services. We have had successful pilots of the PES, and we'd like to scale this to other municipalities, at least in the 3 provinces where we operate. The PES system, as some of you may know, is in the form of fees or charges on the use of natural resources in return for the protection and conservation of watersheds to continuously provide ecosystem services. We apply users pay principle, polluters pay principle, and providers get principle. We are also currently formulating the water resource management financing framework to guide local governments, allocate resources, public resources, and to deliberately engage the private sector in contributing to watershed management, local communities, and the institutionalization of the PES scheme. I think that's about it. Over to you, Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Alma, and thank you to all our panelists for your presentation. So at this point, we will start our Q&A. We invite the participants to just type in your questions in the Q&A box. We have started receiving them, and I think some of them are being answered by some of our panelists. But just to jumpstart our conversation, I just wanted to mention that across all presentations, there are very similar or recurring themes or elements. So one would be the provision of wash services, then complemented by initiatives to conserve water resources or conserve watersheds, and then supported by initiatives on the enabling environment. But one important or very critical approach that I've noticed among projects is the use of science and data. And so my first question is to the panelists, if you can speak to this. How has the use of science and data influenced policy and planning decisions among national and local governments and service providers on your respective projects? Has science helped make the invisible issues more visible on your projects? And maybe to Alifa, we received a question about quantitatively measuring the impacts of the spring action plans and infiltration ponds in terms of water quality and quantity. If you can speak to that when you respond to this question. Who would like to start?
Yeah, may I, Joanne?
Go ahead. Was that Alma or Alifa?
Alma.
Go ahead, Alma.
Okay. So Philippine water institutions have not really been used to using data, evidence, science rigorously. And this is one of the approaches that we've used in Safe Water project. The use of data, evidence, science has been, a hallmark of how we do things in safe water, and it has served us well. As I've mentioned earlier, the data that we have presented um, and the scientific analysis that we've presented to our stakeholders motivated them to, participate in the development efforts. Finally, I think they're seeing how dire and urgent their situation is. It also promoted buy-in among our key stakeholders, policy and decision makers, the solutions that we have recommended or that we've worked with them uh, because they know that this is being backed by very sound and solid, robust analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Alma.
Yes, if I may add, actually similar what with the Philippines has when we develop the spring vulnerable assessment, we also have difficulties to get the similar data from one city to another. So this is still become an issue. That's why one of our lessons learned that we note and share with the government in the end of the project is how we can synchronize and integrated the data to be able to have a better analysis for the vulnerability of the spring. However, when we completed to develop the spring vulnerability assessment, we conduct several advocacy activities at least at the city level to introduce, promote, and socialize the document of the vulnerability assessment result and including the action plan to the policymakers, to the mayor, to the head of the local government offices. So it will bring their awareness, and also they know the condition of the raw water sources. So this is can be also one of sources for their making the policy, at least at the local government level. And also, as the question raised by one of the participants, that we also have some training for the water utility to do quantity and quality monitoring. So water quality and quantity monitoring. So the result is also to share with the people at the city level, so they know the improvement or the problem of their raw water sources. So it will help also to improve the policy or the other, for example, budgeting plan and others.
Thank you, Alifa. To Nilu, I noted that you mentioned earlier that Karnali conducted some water accounting exercise. Would you like to speak to that experience?
So, Joanne, we are beginning that process. We haven't started that yet, but we have just completed our baseline, and the baseline has compared the 4 watersheds status in terms of access to water and sanitation facilities. And based on the data, we found that Rara is the most water insecure of the 4 watersheds. So in year 1, in year 2, we are planning on constructing 45 schemes. I think we're moving straight into Rara because that data has definitely enabled us to make a decision where we should head and where some of the 45 schemes should be, because, and then if you also look at the population and the demographics, we do have most geographically and also remoteness of the region itself, access to market roads, and also wealth quintiles. If you look at that data that has been provided by the baseline we conducted, Rara is definitely on the top. So that's how we are using that to select our schemes. But what specific schemes? it's the tool that I mentioned, the criteria-based ranking tool, that will help enable that. And then the spring source assessment that we are doing will also help us decide which of the, I mean, there'll be thousands of springs in those in the 4 watersheds, but it's definitely helping us narrow it down to which ones for which schemes in which areas. That's how we're going to use the data.
Thank you. Thank you to all. It's very clear that science and data's vital role is to provide very credible information to support decision making. So now I would like to focus the conversation to finance. Question on what alternative financing mechanisms were used in the projects, but I'd like to broaden it a little bit because financing water resource management can be a huge challenge. And so in your experience, I know that some of you mentioned adopting or using or focusing on payment for ecosystem services. Apart from that, are there any promising mechanisms for funding water resource management, promising and alternative financing mechanisms? Who would like to start?
I can start, Joanne, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Is
So
that maybe
basically,
you? Okay.
yeah. So basically, we're still in the planning stage, but this is in what's in the pipeline. Payment for ecosystem, we are learning the Philippines successful model, and we will be piloting at least 1 or 2 schemes. But we're also looking at local government collaboration, and then we are, through the criteria-based ranking tool, we are giving weightage also to local governments who will leverage their funds. So that's another mechanism. But one that we are looking at is looking at the insurance market to ensure schemes from, natural calamities and disasters, floods and droughts. So we are now scoping the insurance market to see if there's interest and what would the interest be, and would it be for what types of infrastructure in the wash sector. So that scoping will definitely allow us to engage either private, we're looking mostly at private sector. That's the insurance market here in Nepal right now. Of course, there's some major public private sector ones as well, but exploring that to see if these infrastructure that we are supporting would have some sustainable funding, because the communities would not be able to cope with disaster-related impacts, especially from flooding and all that in the Karnali. So, yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Nilu.
From the Indonesia case, actually, as I mentioned in my answer in the Q&A chat box, the promising mechanism during the IWAS Plus project is the alternative financing through business to business. So the investor from the private sector provided financing to the water utility directly, and for expanding the water resources. Actually, this kind of mechanism is available in Indonesia, but the problem, the awareness of the local government still not there yet, because they are still worried. A lot of readiness criteria they need to prepare, and also sometimes they don't know how to do the business to business. So that's why the USAID IWAS Plus team tried to advocate local government to convince that about the B2B mechanism. So in one of area, it is help and success. But we need to continue with the support for the national government to more and more promote the business to business mechanism to the water utility and the local government, because the water utility cannot proceed by themselves, but also need the support from the local government.
Thank you, Alifa.
Yeah, Joanne?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go
Yes,
ahead, Nilu.
Alma. I'll go back to you, Nilu. Go ahead, Alma.
Okay, I just want to share as well the experience here in the Philippines, and it's not very different from what Alifa and Nilu just mentioned. Earlier, I said that one of our challenges is the very, very low investments that local governments put in for water resource management. So I think the first thing that we have to do is to make them aware how important it is to invest in watershed management. So we'd like to increase significantly public resource allocation for watershed management. However, we know that there are constraints because there are many competing uses of the local government funds. So we're looking at the PAS for one. We're also looking at public-private partnerships, particularly for diversifying sources for water supply. That is the development of surface bulk water projects. And then we are also seeing a very good potential with private sector partnerships. They can bring in resources, not just from their CSR, but from their business models as well. We've seen this to be really effective. So in the provincial integrated water security plans, developing partnerships will be a deliberate strategy. And then we are also seeing the potential of community equity. Part of the sustainable livelihood investment, uh, sustainable livelihood projects or programs that we've conducted is to help farmers have cash crops and have so that they are encouraged to plant trees within the watershed. So these are the measures that the project has in terms of the finance.
Thank you,
Over to you.
Alma. Thank you, Alma. Nilu, I think you wanted to add something, and while you have the microphone, I wanted to field the question to you raised by one of our participants. There is a question on whether the one water approach include industrial and commercial water users, and whether there are any conflicts arising among water users in securing water for domestic water use. I know that it's quite a big jump from financing to approaches for water resource management, but please go ahead.
Sure. So let me respond to that question first. So yes, the One Water is looking at water as one, whether it's groundwater, gray water, whether it's surface water or rainwater, it is one water. That's the lens being used. So that will definitely include the gray water part, which is produced by the industrial and other treatment plants. So we will definitely be considering that. And yes, the challenge in Nepal, as in other neighboring countries, what we have this mindset and the way the ministries are structured, everybody works in silos. So the siloed approach of planning and implementing will be the biggest challenge. So the One Water Steering Committee will ensure that at least the members on the platform, on this committee, will be comprised of stakeholders and representative from the different sectors. It will include representative from private sector, which is also will be inclusive of public and private entities and industrial as well. Yes. So and then moving on to back to the innovative financing mechanism. On the previous project that I worked on, the USAID PANI project, which ended in June of 2021, for river conservation, we established a Karnali River Basin Conservation Fund. So it had two components. One was a foundation, or worked like a trust, with corporate social responsibility funds from different corporations. That was the design. It was fully designed and established and registered. The other was an impact fund, so Karnali Basin Conservation Fund. The impact fund was looking at a pipeline of investments that they developed and are still now looking. I mean, the pandemic threw off their activities for fundraising and all of that, but the funds are alive. They're trying to raise money, and I think they're in talks and partnership with DFC to see if they would be able to fund the impact fund of it. So that was a very innovative idea. We did a scoping first to see the viability of such funds, and the scoping revealed that it is viable, but from a policy angle, a lot more needs to be done to allow regulations to enable impact fund investors to invest in Nepal on a sizable amount, not a huge one, So there are some challenges on the policy side that needs to be worked on, which I believe these fund managers are working on right now still, and working to see if they can then work with different the IMFs and the DFCs and the CDCs once the policy environment is enabled to raise that amount. But it is innovative. There's a lot of interest, and it's just the mechanism of how to put the money in there is what they're working on right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilu. So I'm picking up from the discussion on financing that it has to be creative. There has to be diversity, pulling in, contributions from the private sector to complement public resources. I wanted to close the issue of financing and moved on to another, but just very quickly to Nilu and Alma, can you specify at least three groups that are actually paying payment for ecosystem services schemes? Just three.
Three meaning municipalities or?
From where the PES fees are being collected.
Oh, I see. So they come from water consumers. So water districts, for example, have embedded in their fees an environment fee, and that is ring fence and used for water resource management. It can also come from users of water, like the industries or commercial establishments. Could also come from ecotourism sites or services.
Nilu in Nepal?
So in Nepal, I mean, like I said, we haven't piloted the scheme yet, but we have looked at best practices on lake systems here. There is one lake in the central region of Nepal that's done quite well in terms of lake management. So the upstream communities are paid by the downstream communities. And there are, I mean, besides the ones that Alma mentioned, I think besides ecotourism, because in a very touristy area, it's a lake which is used for recreational purpose. The water from the lake is used to grow a very special variety of rice, and that is sold in the market, and that's how it's also raised. So from commodities, from the productive use of that water is what I would like to add in addition to what was shared by Alma.
Thank you. So I would now like to transition to another topic. We all know that groundwater is the theme of today's World Water Day. And so one participant noted that there is a low understanding of groundwater resources and the interaction with surface water persists in developing countries. So the question is, what are your projects doing with regard to improving this understanding?
Yes, during the experience of IWAS Plus, we try to use this kind of opportunity like the World Water Day, Earth Day, or there are the other occasion to try to promote the different, the understanding about the relationship between groundwater and the surface water, because this is important to the people to conserve the water at least in their area, and also will be contribute more to the water utility. Yeah, usually we use the opportunity of the celebration of the some specific day to do the advocacy to the community.
In Nepal's case, I mean, groundwater studies are limited. We have very limited data. And that's also because it's very expensive, is what we understand. And groundwater is primarily the source in the Tarai region. So we have three ecological belts: the mountain region, most of the Himalayas and the mountains are located. Then we have mid-hill areas, as I showed you on a map. There's one watershed that is at downstream of the Karnali, right before Karnali enters India. So that area, their primary source is groundwater. What we do understand is the deep boring that they are doing for the hand pumps and all of that. They're going deeper every couple of years. So we understand that groundwater, there is depletion, that's for sure. Now, as shared, we have a social behavioral communication campaign as well on the project that will work on people understanding that this is not a finite commodity. It will get more stressful. How do you conserve and manage better? What kind of technologies would be more suitable? We will be looking, because we will have to select schemes also to support sanitation schemes as well as water supply schemes in the lower Karnali. So that's what we'll be dealing with. But yeah, in terms of data and study, it is limited.
Same here. As you know, our groundwater sources are 10 to 13% only of the total water sources available. Yet 80% of our water service providers, or 80% of the water supply, is actually coming from groundwater sources. So we've used the data that we've gathered from past studies and the hydrology studies as well to present to the stakeholders how the disparity on exploitation of groundwater sources and ground and surface water sources. And we've used this to encourage them to diversify their resources, bulk water sources. And along with this, we're offering them solutions on how they can do this expediently. So if they say that they do not have enough fiscal resources, then we offer public-private partnerships. And we've linked them with the PPP Center of the Philippines so that they can access financing for project preparation and transaction advisory.
Thank you, Alma. We have about 5 minutes left, maybe less. So I need to wrap up the Q&A very soon. But one question that I would like to highlight for those of you who are now very involved in water resource management, I got this very interesting question about is the management of groundwater separate from surface water? And would you consider groundwater more resilient in the face of climate change? Any thoughts?
In our, if I may start, in the case of the Philippines, yeah, I would not actually, well, because we're not monitoring it, we're not doing enough to protect it or to, sustain its recharge. I would say that I would veer more towards encouraging our water supply and sanitation service providers to use surface water sources.
Any additional inputs from Nepal or Indonesia?
So in the case of Nepal, we are using surface and spring sources quite a lot. Mm-hmm. We do have rivers that flow, besides the low flow in the dry months, which we're looking at in March, April, May. The monsoons do add a lot, and the melting of the snow, so that's quite plentiful. But the challenge is the rivers are at a certain elevation, and the villages and the communities are at an elevated level. So that's a challenge which maybe technology can serve, like, with pumps, renewable energy solutions as well, solar lift pumps. So we are paying more attention to what we can see above the ground. And in terms of spring sources, the mountains and hills, that's what has been the source for most of the schemes. And that's why understanding how many are there, the quality, the quantity is very important to do planning for the future through the water use master plans that we are working on. So the focus has been on surface and spring sources. But when we are working in the Tarai, we definitely have to pay attention to groundwater. And hopefully this water accounting exercise that we will do with International Water Management Institute will give us proxy numbers of water availability. So there's so much surface, there's so much coming from rain, and then what's left over and what is trickling down or being recharged is going to the groundwater may give us some indication. but I'm not counting on that fully. So yeah, without the accurate data and without seeing it, what's available, how low are the tables, how further down, it is hard to plan.
Thank you, Nilu.
Yep.
Alifa?
If I add, I think the groundwater is now become one serious problem, especially for example, like for Jakarta, because the extraction of groundwater is quite extensive in Jakarta, and I'm sure similar case in the other big cities in Indonesia. So now. Uh, the government is quite monitor that the problem on subsidence of groundwater in Jakarta is quite serious right now. So we really need to also thinking about not only the surface water but also the groundwater, especially for the big city. Yeah, currently, as we know, the coordination between the institution managing the groundwater and surface water is still not quite in line. So I think this is the big another challenge that we need to think to develop in our project. Yeah, unfortunately, the IWAS Plus not really specifically working for the groundwater. Yeah, but yeah, I think this is the serious problem now.
Thank you, Alifa. I think that wraps up our Q&A. This has certainly been a very informative and learning conversation. I wanted to thank all the participants for giving us your comments and questions. Please join me as well in thanking our panelists, Alifa, Nilu, and Alma, for sharing with us a wealth of their experience and expertise to help build a more secure future for Indonesia, Nepal, and Philippines. With that, I turn it over to my colleague and friend Tri Linggot Modro of USAID Indonesia to close the program. Over to you, Tri.
Thank you, Joan, also to Alma, Nilu, and Alifa for the lively panel discussion. We all know that we are all working on an important mission: availability and sustainable management of safely managed drinking water and sanitation, especially for the underserved and most vulnerable population, which becomes more important during and beyond COVID-19 pandemic. The three projects, USAID IWAS Plus in Indonesia, USAID Karnali Water Activity in Nepal, and USAID Philippines Safe Water Activity, through all women panelists, share with us the water resource challenge management and opportunities to expand the drinking water supply services. The growing population and increasing water demand from various sectors adding more stress to the water sources. Change in land use and unchecked ground and surface water pollution, as we heard during the discussion, are degrading ecosystems. We heard from the panelists that climate change is already increasing water stress in many places, making water availability less predictable, with more extreme rainfall and flooding in some areas and more severe or frequent drought in others. So we all really know that water-related disasters account for 90% of natural disasters globally, and especially impact vulnerable populations. In summary, as we all know from the panelists, we highlighted how USAID is integrating consideration of water resource management into our portfolio of WASH programming, including focusing on some of the less feasible actions that are needed to make our investments in water services more sustainable and resilient. All of these projects are supporting the data and analysis needed for service providers and governments to make evidence-based decisions around water allocations, restoration watersheds, and investments in water. Our speakers today have also highlighted the critical importance of partnering with local stakeholders, including government institutions, water service providers, community groups, also to engage private sector to protect and manage critical water resources. We also heard that the importance of finance for water resource management, which is often neglected in favor of more visible investments such as water service infrastructures. The 3 USAID projects are innovating ways to place a clear value on water resources and mobilize finance for conservation activities. So we are really pleased to have this opportunity. And then if you need additional resources, as also put in the chat box about all of our work, it's available on globalwaters.org. Thank you all for attending today and for your engagement during our panel discussion. We hope to have an opportunity to continue discussing this theme again soon. With this,